My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too. Hi, hello, hola, bonjour, shalom, all of the hellos to you. It's the holidays. Are we sad? Are we crying into our voice memos? The amount of time I cried into my voice memo and sent it to people is truly significant information. I should really do a roundup of every voice memo I did this year. One in January, one in February, one in March, and who and how I cried over and what. Just sharing that this is a charged time of year. If you're feeling jolly and holly and you're feeling yourself, go off. If you're feeling horrible and like you just cannot stand or deal with people who say stand or anyone who is happy at all, go off. If you're like, I'm kind of neutral, but I'm here, I'm on a walk, I'm listening to a podcast, go off. I just made really weird eye contact with someone walking down the street because Los Angeles, we live in crowded spaces. I hope he knows that he's being mentioned on this podcast and his address is... This year I'm feeling pretty neutral. I shared a bit last week, but I just don't have holly jolly vibes because I'm not dating or seeing anyone. 2 years ago and I was in a relationship. Last year I was in a situationship. This year I'm just me, myself, and I vibing. Still haven't gone to Vancouver yet, but I'm leaving tomorrow, which I'll probably be there by the time this drops, with my mom, leaving nice and early, dropping off my dog. I'm always like, what if my dog never remembers me and she never cares about me again? JK, she was very sad yesterday. Someone was very sad to be wet, and it was Penny. She comes back from the rain. It poured yesterday in LA, which is not very common. She came back in from the wetness and just sulked. She went into a corner and like sat in the corner of the room and just sulked and like would turn around to make eye contact and then would turn back around to sulk. I'm like, sis, you have an orange puffer jacket. Be blessed. The dogs of Los Angeles would give. Just kidding. It was like $8 and someone gave it to me. But I mean, it was a moment. If they're less sopping in like 1/16 of their area, I will take it. All that to say, I'm feeling neutral vibes. I'm nolly. And I'm here to support the nollies and the hollies and the jollies. I'm okay with that. It's so strange as an adult when you're doing the holidays because you're like, do I cook now? Like, am I doing a white elephant? Do I care about this? Do I want to like put a lot of time into this? Do I not know anything that I'm saying? Do I want to go to a dinner party? Do I want to go on a Bumble date? Do I want to just like go to Vancouver with my mom? Yes and no to all of these things. This week I shared I was supposed to go on a date Thursday. Just no response. He asked me out Monday. For Thursday, I said yes. And we just didn't ever speak again. So I even checked in Thursday at like 4. And if you have to check in, it's so not happening. But I'm like, I'm busy and I have a life and I have a dog and I need to plan this. And I just like threw it out there. Hey, if you still want to meet up tonight, I can do around 7 or 8. And like not even a cancel, just an absolute no reply. So that's my low of the week because you're like, you're an adult in your 30s. Like get your shit together. At least cancel to my face. Say something. Say anything. And my win of the week, I organized my friend's meal train today for her baby. That was cute. I had a last audition of the year, you should say. It's a film in Mississippi, and I had my blue hair and I vibed, and my friend Kelly helped me virtually tape that. I was to play a drug addict. I do not do drugs, obviously, but it would be cool to explore that in a film. So that was what I did. And I had my last day I had this virtual job for the past 12 weeks, hosting team parties and game parties and holiday parties for companies. And that ended today. So, okay, that's more information than you needed to know. All that to say, I'm going to release the first episode I ever released. This is a re-air/reshare. As relevant as ever, this is the story as to why I started this podcast, and I feel like it's a full circle moment. Actually, no, I hate when people say full circle moments. I don't know what that means. It's like too nostalgic or like happy or like weird. I don't know. This is why I released the podcast. It's the story of my parents' illness, and if you've been here for a while, you might already know it, but if you're new, you might not, because I released this podcast in 2020. So it's just a relatively quick version of the last million years of my life. No pressure. It's so important to take breaks. So next week will be technically off of the pod, but I also am like a big pod listener when I travel. So I will be listening to pods on the plane and on walks, and maybe you are too. So this one is for you, and we'll come back to interviews in the new year. And if you have further thoughts or want to share your grief story or who you're honoring or celebrating this year, hit me up in the DMs at DyingOfLaughterPodcast, and I like to connect and hear what's going on with you. Thanks so much for being here. Glad we're back at the end of 2023, just sprinkling it on back, just sprinkling the cinnamon on the yogurt, just sprinkling the craisins on the cereal, just sprinkling the yeast on the pasta. Do you know what I mean? Nutritional yeast. Are we into that? Okay, maybe no. This is where it ends. Also, my mom is here because she doesn't want to fly alone. So we're flying out together. She's probably listening to this entire thing. She's also on the phone. I can kind of hear her. Can you hear her? Yeah. But you know what they say. YODO, you only die once. Finally sitting down to record this first episode. At this point, I have recorded more than 20 interviews with people in their 20s and 30s who have lost a parent or a sibling. And I'm feeling really excited about that. Is that weird? So this is the first episode I've been kind of avoiding because it's just me talking, which is a lot more challenging as well as vulnerable to talk about my journey. But I figured if someone is listening to this podcast or wants to listen to it, they might be curious about why I am doing it. Perhaps you read the description below that explains a little bit about the journey, but I'm going to give just like a quick recap of my story. I'll probably redo this at some point one day with a producer and make it fancy and less laggy and awkward, but for now, this is where we are. So when I was in 3rd grade, my parents were diagnosed with ALS and breast cancer, but my dad's first symptoms of ALS occurred several years before, when I was about 4. So at that time, they didn't diagnose him for a few years. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess technology gets better every day, every year certainly, and maybe at the time they just didn't assume it was ALS. So if you don't know what ALS is, fuck you. Just kidding. No one does. So all good. ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's also called Lou Gehrig's disease, named after the famous baseball player who died from it. It's a disease where your muscles stop working and essentially deteriorate. That's why people who have ALS look a little bit strange or quite skinny. You tend to either lose feeling in your limbs first, your arms and legs, or some people lose their voice first. My dad was losing feeling in his arms and legs at first. I remember him walking around without the use of his arms for a long time. That image is very clear. We could still race up the stairs, walk around, do somewhat normal stuff. He just couldn't use his arms or his hands. So people would feed him food at the dinner table. He said one of his first symptoms was dropping forks and not being able to hold pens and kind of feeling uneasy, like, is it me? What's going on? This is weird, because it was very faint at first, kind of like a very slight twitch, and then eventually continued to develop to the point where it was not just him, it was the ALS. ALS kind of became known by the Ice Bucket Challenge. What's a terminal illness without a viral video associated with it? Am I right? Before that, literally, I don't think anyone I talked to had ever heard of it. They don't know how you get it, and there is no cure. They are learning more and more, and there's some things that are slowing the process, which is fantastic. I'll probably go into that more at some point, but essentially those are the basics. So I became really fascinated earlier on in my life that someone could get this disease, slowly lose all feeling in their body, have their brain be not affected at all whatsoever, and then there was just nothing they could do about it. I remember my dad as someone who lived on a bed. He lived on the bed in the upstairs bedroom of my house for many years. He couldn't feed himself at that point or even move, walk, couldn't scratch his face, couldn't change the channel. He had an oxygen tube up his nose, both nostrils to help him breathe. There was a lot of nurses in my house, or sometimes part-time, or, different people would be in and out. There was a muscle guy, a masseuse guy. There was just all kinds of people helping him. My mom took care of him for many years in the home. And eventually, after about 4 years, he moved into a 24-hour care home about 45 minutes away from my house. Fortunately, it was a really great establishment that admittedly not everyone can afford to be in a place like that. And that is a huge issue of ALS, the financial costs associated with it. Because full-time care, as you know, is very expensive. And my mom, bless her heart, took care of him for a long time. And it's, a really personal decision what each family can do or is able to do or wants to do. But eventually that was what was best for our family and for him. So he had 24-hour care. I visited him about once a week. I remember it being very strange to be in 7th grade and to have a dad who didn't move live somewhere else in essentially kind of like an old people's home is the closest thing I can compare it to, except people were in and out all the time. And not because they got better, but because they died. So I remember seeing people one week, the next week they weren't there. And I'll never forget, there was a girl there in her 20s who had a picture of her and her boyfriend on her nightstand. She had been in a rock climbing accident and unfortunately had fallen and was now very disfigured and mentally ill and, she just didn't look like the normal person she once looked like. And I remember thinking, whoa, that person on the nightstand is that person in the bed, because they look totally different. My dad loved deep conversation. He was extremely intelligent. We would talk about sports, politics, entertainment, news, what was going on in the world. He was a huge source of feeding me what was happening. And I kind of have triggers around when sometimes people are very intelligent or very in the know, because I have this sort of open wound inside of me that says, well, I would have been more intelligent if my dad was alive. Is that an excuse? Is it true? Does it matter? I don't know. My dad went to Dartmouth at age 16. He graduated college at 20. He entered Harvard Law School at 20, and by 23, he had 2 degrees. So yeah, he was really smart and very married to his work. Law was his life. And although I can't relate to loving law, no offense, I can relate to loving what I do. And eventually he couldn't work anymore. He worked from home for a number of years. He had people move the computer mouse for him, do his emails, all of that stuff. But after a while, that only becomes so possible. So when he couldn't work anymore, I noticed a shift in his depression, understandably. I didn't really know what depression was at the time, but you catch my drift. And I just have so much respect and empathy for anyone who can no longer do what they love, for anyone who can no longer move, or for anyone who was at one point a certain way in the world and at another point is another way in the world. So he came to every play I was ever in. I did about 3 a year, plays and musicals, dance recitals, sometimes 4 a year. And he was at every single one that I ever did in his wheelchair with his oxygen tubes and his nurses and help. Came in with a minivan that brought him in and out on a ramp and a wheelchair, and it was a whole thing. Super embarrassing. Sometimes people said things, sometimes they didn't. People definitely ask what was wrong with him. What's wrong with your dad? Is your dad okay? Is your dad retarded? Why does he look like that? Definitely all questions that I got. So when I was a senior in high school, my sister was a sophomore. Eventually my dad was no longer able to speak. His voice box no longer moved. I don't exactly know how it works, but he was 100% completely coherent and aware of what was going on, but he could not move and he could not speak. And when you have ALS, the muscles in your face are, they've deteriorated, so you kind of just look like a stone, weird, sad statue. And the thought that someone was coherent inside of that shape is still one of the most heartbreaking images that I'll ever have in my mind. He didn't speak for about the last year. I went to college. I was a freshman at USC. Oh, I should have said this before. I'm originally from the Bay Area, a town called Novato in Marin County, about 50 minutes from San Francisco, give or take. So it was about an hour plane ride away. I felt a lot of guilt and stress about going to school, but I knew it's what he would have wanted for me. That said, not being able to have phone calls was stressful because I would email updates. But of course, being an 18-year-old freshman in college, there's so much going on. There's so much to adjust to, so much fun and partying and theater and sorority and just craziness. I definitely didn't update him very much. Now I would have been so good. Like if he was alive right now, I would have talked to him all the time and sent all these cool emails. But it is, that's how old I was. This is what happened, not what I wanted to happen. This was my life. And I would fly home almost every weekend to see him. It was very awkward. Talking to him, talking to anyone who doesn't respond is in general quite awkward. And after about a year of that, he died. It was very complicated. It was extremely expensive to keep him alive at that point. There was a lot of nurses, a lot of people in and out, a lot of people with opinions about how long he should live and when and how he should live and what he should do. When you're on a feeding tube for years and can't speak and can't communicate other than blinking at letters on a makeshift whiteboard to spell out what it is that you want, it's not a great life anymore. From start to finish, this journey had been 15 years of his life. About 75% of people with ALS live just a few years, often 2 or 3 years. It's much, much less common to live more than that or more than 10 years. So he's definitely in the exception, not the rule category, but also good to know that anything is possible. I have a lot of empathy for my sister who was still in high school during this. So I kind of, got to escape a little bit of all the craziness of that last year because I was at school, and that must have been really difficult for her to have been witnessing it all, and the stress levels of my mom, certainly. I have a lot more to say about my dad and about how I felt about it and about how I feel about it now, but we will save that for another day. To touch on my mom, let's touch my mom. That sounds totally fine. To speak about my mom for a moment, she was diagnosed with breast cancer the same year that my dad was diagnosed with ALS, which again was when I was in 3rd grade and my sister was in 1st. My mom had surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the works. She lost her hair. She lost a lot of things during that time. I remember her being very stressed out. Looking back, I think that's really fascinating that technically breast cancer was the lesser of 2 evils. ALS is fatal, breast cancer is not. And how much work she put into taking care of my dad and visiting him almost every single day when he moved out. And knowing she had breast cancer for some of those years is really kind of incredible. I just have so much respect for her. My mom and I are so close. I'm so grateful for, the normal life that I had besides these things. I had a good life and got good grades, loved performing, loved my theater community. I loved my friends, was in a safe neighborhood. I can't really ask for a better upbringing besides, all of this. But there are some emotional and psychological effects of witnessing my parents' illnesses that have carried into my adult life that I struggle with, and I think some of it could have been avoided and or dealt with earlier on. So that's something I'm passionate about talking about too. And that's something that I hope other kids growing up can perhaps avoid or can perhaps handle a little bit better than what I hope it can be a little bit easier for them than it was for me. We'll go into that on another day as well. So my mom's breast cancer went away. She was in remission for many, many years, but 17 years later from her initial diagnosis, my mom's breast cancer came back. I was 25. They told her she had stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. Metastatic means it has metastasized. I can never say that correctly. Metastasized. That's all I got for today. It had metastasized to her bones. So what that means is it had already spread and she would no longer be eligible to recover. So my mom will have breast cancer for the rest of her life. Just because your breast cancer spreads doesn't mean that that is the same for you. It is very individual. I'm obviously not a health professional. I'm going to interview a lot of them and I'm going to share more about that later, but just to catch you up to speed about where things are. So her cancer returned to her bones, spine, and sternum. She does not have breast cancer in her breast. It is the breast cancer in her bones. A lot of people didn't know that that could happen. I certainly didn't, but that is a possibility. So the good news is today she's had her breast cancer for 3 years. She takes oral chemotherapy, which is great because it's a lot, quote unquote, easier on your body than chemotherapy. The bad news is chemotherapy is what's ultimately, hopefully, going to get rid of your cancer, and that wouldn't be appropriate for her, seeing as they are not able to get rid of it. So a lot of people are quite confused about, is my mom okay? Is my mom healthy? What does my mom's future look like? We do not know. About 85% of people in my mom's situation live less than 5 years. It's been 3 years. So that is upsetting, obviously. But the good news is she's doing really, really great. My mom is in next to no pain. She can't even believe she has breast cancer, which is such a gift. She can drive, she can walk, she can exercise again. I mean, they say live your best life, but I kind of think she is. Hashtag live your best life. No, but like she is. She's an amazing attitude, which I think helps. It also does not completely cure you. I kind of have triggers around when people say, well, my person meditated every single day and then she was cured. It's really complicated. I do believe having a positive attitude makes a huge difference. Absolutely. But I also think there's certain genetic factors that contribute to certain illnesses and diseases. And who knows what the universe or a higher power or anything or anyone or God out there has in store for her or for anyone. So this podcast, all of this has been a long time coming. I remember being a little girl and thinking about death so much. Where did people go? Why did they go? When would I get to see them again? Would I ever see them again? Did they know what I was doing that moment? Does my dad know I'm doing this podcast right now? This didn't come easy to me overnight. Even now, like I said, my mom's latest journey has been 3 years. My dad died almost 10 years ago. So I'm finally at a place where I feel like I'm, for some strange reason, uniquely in this spot, and I wonder if it's for a reason. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but I kind of just felt compelled to open up about it since I had the second parent diagnosed with a terminal illness. My mom will also be talking about the BRCA genes, also called the BRCA genes. I'm doing a podcast launch party this Thursday. I hope to see some of you there, or I hope some of you were there at the time of listening to this. We're interviewing Erica Silver, a fantastic genetics counselor and breast health specialist, about what BRCA is. And if you weren't there, there'll be more information for you in upcoming episodes on how to screen, when, how, why, who should test, when you should start screening, how old you should be, testing for breast cancer, all of that stuff. But for now, just wanted to mention my mom does not have the BRCA gene. BRCA gene is a gene you can test for to find out if you have an 80% chance of getting breast cancer. This is an overwhelming statistic for many. About 1 in 40 healthy Ashkenazi Jewish women will have this mutation. And if you have it, I personally recommend getting a double mastectomy or screening a lot more often and a lot earlier. I don't want to alarm or overwhelm people with this information. They say about 1 in 3 to 400 girls have the BRCA mutation if you're not Jewish, which is still a lot of people. But I wanted this to be a safe space and an opportunity to go through the options, talk to some women who have had the mutation, and talk about their experience and what you can do. So not everyone who has breast cancer has the BRCA gene, which is really interesting. Actually, the majority don't. But if you do, there's preventative steps that we can take. And I would love to help you figure that out. Devin Seidel is coming to the podcast launch party. She's an actress, producer, and previvor. A previvor means you've been identified as someone who has the BRCA mutation. So I'm excited to chat with her, and we're going to get her on here soon, talk about her experience, which will be really wonderful. So yeah, also when I was younger, my grandfather in high school and the woman he was married to, they were the only grandparents I knew, so I've experienced that too. My mother really fascinates me because she lost her own mother to cancer when she was 19, and 19 was the same age that I was when my dad died, which is kind of freaky on my child's future 19th birthday. Knock on wood, y'all. Or I don't have a child right now, but if and when. So I just have so much respect for my mom, who lost her own mom when she was a teenager to cancer, married a man who got ALS, got breast cancer, recovered, and now has breast cancer again. There's an upcoming interview with her that I'm really excited to share to talk more about her journey. I find it kind of cool that my dad was a lawyer and a really funny guy, and then ultimately my sister became a lawyer and I became a really funny guy. Okay, that is a lot of info. I hope that paints somewhat of a picture. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have feedback, please email me at DyingOfLaughterPodcast@gmail.com. This is a brand new show. I want to hear from you guys. I want feedback. I'm sure I'll make mistakes. I'm sure things could be better. So please, I'm very open. If you have thoughts around the content, the quality, any of that stuff. If you would like to nominate a guest, you can send me their name and information. If you want to nominate yourself, let's chat. I'm on Instagram @_ChelseWhoElse_. My website is chelsewhoelse.com. You can see my comedy stuff on there if you're interested in that jazz. I really look forward to sharing more and to this journey that we're going to go on together, y'all. Can't wait for you to hear from the other cool people I've interviewed about their own experiences around grief, loss, illness, breast cancer. It's going to be cool. It's going to be sad, but it's going to be cool. It's going to be funny too. We can laugh and cry together, y'all. I'm excited. I'm grateful. This was really fun. Oh, and if you want to help or support in some way, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts is super helpful and appreciated. It helps people find the show and see that other people are listening alongside of them. Again, guys, this is brand new and I'm making this by myself, so it really means a lot. And if you do, please let me know, DM me or email me that you left a review so that I can personally thank you. You can also subscribe and hit 5 stars if you like it. That's also helpful. And thank you so much, and have an awesome day.